Are you working on revisions like I am? Every time I get asked, Val, what are you working on? Oh, I'm revising book 3 in the Princess Priest, or the Trebon family saga, which is the Princess Priest, the Priestess, the Assassin Saint. I know I have to say all 3 book titles in my head or out loud, but in the Assassin Saint, I am doing revisions, and every time I answer this, other authors just get this look of fear. They're like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I'm like, "Who died? Who died?" No, you should be excited about revisions. And I think one of the biggest things I'm discovering as I open this conversation to authors that I've been in contact with and talking to this year is that so many of you are trying to do it all at once. And that's not what revision should ever be. Okay, first off, you should always try to lay out the bare bones of your story from start to finish so you have some sense of direction. Think of it as emptying the cards out of the card pack. Lay them out. Don't worry if they're lined up because you haven't quite made all the decisions, right? You don't know if you're going to line these up where they're all in numerical order. They're divided by suits. They're divided by playable hands. We're not there yet. We don't even know if we're playing poker or goldfish. Goldfish. But what I do know and what I can recommend is a couple of things. First off, revisions is where you're going to make your prose pretty. Stop making prose pretty in your first draft because you haven't quite locked in your writing style and writing voice for that story until you've finished drafting it out. Once you're at the end, you have a clear understanding where this is going and what tone of voice you want to make sure you nudge it into. The other thing is you should be just face it now, you're going to do several rounds of revisions. It is not a one and done. It will never be one and done. If it is one and done, you're a crazy person because you're stretching yourself too thin. Or you have a damn good editor who fills that gap for you. But what you should be doing is divide and conquer. For example, my first revision round for the Assassin Saint was let's look at all the love letters. I call them love letters. I leave comments and I highlight stuff to first look at when I'm done writing the story because I'm not sure if it's in the right direction, not the right tone. It needs more meat on its bone. Something feels off about it. And it's so crazy because sometimes these bits that feel off, that now that I've written the rest of it, it makes more sense. Oh, no, this is actually foreshadowing that I didn't even know was foreshadowing a thing. Let me just touch it just slightly to nudge it all the way to what it's actually implying. So yes, I write stories and don't know all the intricate details, and somehow I still foreshadow stuff. But that's the whole idea of that I'm always chasing the story and not creating the story. The other thing I like to do is I then focus on my main character, my love interest, and then all my sub characters. So now we're up to 4 revision rounds. You see where this is going. And it's because it's a lot easier to get my brain to lock onto the tracks of revisions and see a clear goal. All right, I don't need to worry about this other stuff. Now, that doesn't mean you can't fix it as you come across it, especially if it's a blaring issue. But it gives you enough focus of, well, I don't know what to do with that. That's fine because I'm not working on that part yet. And you make a note to yourself. And you should also be doing that as you do revisions. You note bad habits. Things that you notice that you did weird in your writing, or redundancy or issues that you're going to have to double check, because I promise you, if you catch it in 1 or 2 places that it's blaring, there's a good chance it's throughout the whole thing, and you're going to want to base some of your revision and edit rounds on your findings as you're revising. But don't break yourself trying to fix all of these at the same time. break it down. Today I'm focusing on Dante and how he's reacting, how he's perceiving things, what he says. You know, is it lining up where I know the story now ends? And then you go through all your rounds of your characters. You go through how you're describing your world, because I'm totally famous for not describing things properly or in full detail. And then you're going to go through and be like, oh, I made this list of bad habits and things. For some reason, I have overused in the moment, this moment, for the moment. I need to knock that back. And the nice thing about those, that now that you've listed those, you can do like more of a find and replace, and highlight them and just start focusing, because now you've massaged the story and the characters so much that now you can focus just on prose alone. And then usually I do one last reading before it goes to my editor, and I'm just trying to make things pretty, make sure it's not clunky. I know one of my biggest problems, and I think it's just how my brain thinks, but I have a bad habit of saying, instead of he opened the tavern's doors, I'll write he opened the door to the tavern to the right, and I'm like, no, he just opened the tavern's door. Like, sometimes instead of lengthening clunky short summarized stuff, I'm shrinking down things that I've overstated or said weird. Another thing I know that I do, and this is something to always check in your revisions, is where my brain stumbled while writing it. I have literally been known to write 3 sentences back to back that say the same thing, and then I either have to cherry pick one or combine the 3 variants into a new variant. I once paraphrased in Rebirth that he was floating in the air in this empty void. He was suspended in the dark abyss. He was, and it was like, no, pick one, and go from there. And these are the things you should be discovering in revisions. And like I said, do not try to fix all of these all in one go. Revisions is supposed to be a multi-round aspect. It is where you get to focus more on your writing and how you're telling the story to the reader, and making sure that everything that you remember in writing that first draft did indeed make it to the page. Because I can't tell you how many times I'm like, oh crap, I didn't even state in writing that his thoughts were this, or that he was thinking this, or that this had happened. I need to put this physically in here because it wasn't here, and that was the whole point of that scene. But if the reader doesn't read it, they don't know, and that's going to hurt and confuse people so much. And that's another aspect of your revision rounds. So in short, 3 tips for you guys. All right, revise 1 character, 1 item, and 1 goal at a time. 2, write down bad habits as you see them. You will fix those in its own round later. And 3, remember, this is not a one and done process, and that's okay. All right? Don't feel like you're like, man, this feels like round 30. A lot of the most famous novels, literary pieces, took anywhere between 30 to 60 plus revision rounds back in the day. I want you to let that soak in. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to take 30 to 60 rounds. Doesn't mean that I take 30 to 60 revision rounds. But I do make a goal list of what I want to work on next and focus on next. And as I come across new glaring issues, it gets added to my revision list. And is it necessarily revising it 30 times when I'm just focusing parts and pieces? We're going to oil the machine in this one. I'm going to tighten the screws in the next one. That's how you should be seeing revisions. Piece it out 1 step at a time and make that writing pretty.